Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Viviana.
Yes. Is that 30 seconds? Guess so. We'll give everyone another minute or so to join in. We know everyone's just coming in. So while we're waiting, please make sure you're adding comments, telling us where you're from, why you're here, what you're excited to learn about. We're excited to hear from you. We'll take some questions at the end of the panel. But for now, feel free to chime in and join the party. We'll get started here in another minute or so.
And I want to add that this is a party. This is a big panel.
It's good to see some familiar names coming up.
Yeah, from all over the world. This is exciting.
Yep.
We have US in the house, China, the UK, France. Great, thanks for joining. All right, we'll give everyone here a couple more seconds and we'll kick off the panel here. All right, we're 2 minutes in, so I think we can get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Are International Standards Keeping Pace with Technology Innovation for Interpreting? My name is Viviana Bernabe, Director of Interpreting at We Localize, and one of the moderators for GALA's Interpreting and Technology Special Interest Group. We've had a lot of really engaging conversations at our last few SIG meetings and unconference roundtable at the last GALA conference. So I want to start with a quick reminder that our next SIG meeting will be on April 12th. That's next week, so make sure you register on the GALA site. Now, on to our main event. I am pleased to introduce today's panel in alphabetical order. Aki Hayashi, who oversees globalization for Dell. Alvaro Montoya from Akuru, which offers RSI and AI speech-to-text solutions for live events. Claudio Fantinulli from Kudo, which provides RSI and speech-to-text. He's also with Interpret Bink, focusing on Kai tools. Lakshman Ratnam from Wordly, which provides AI speech-to-text and STO solutions for live events. Richard Schiller, Senior Product Manager at Interprify, which provides RSI and speech-to-text. Sergio Lorian from Boost Events, which was one of the first RSI platforms to offer speech-to-text. Tim Young-Hoon Yoon, CEO of Xlate, which provides MT for media and events. And Urush Petex, former president of AIC and currently with Interactio, providing RSI event solutions. Our moderator for today is Naomi Bowman, CEO of DS Interpretation. Naomi, thank you so much for putting together this panel. I'll hand over to you.
Okay, welcome everyone. And we're here today to talk about standards. ISO, the International Standardization Organization, has a committee, Technical Committee 37, Subcommittee 5, and that subcommittee focuses on translation, interpreting, and related technologies. In the past few years, of course, with the pandemic especially, there's been a lot of activity in ISO, and we've seen some updates and some new standards that have been published. We had standard 24019, which is the Simultaneous Interpreting Delivery Platform standard that was published in September of 2022. I was actually project editor of that, and we have a number of representatives here today who are also on that working group. 23155, which is the conference interpreting standard, was also published in January of 2022. Oros Peterts will be talking a bit about that standard. That was a significant publication. There has been an ad hoc group that has been working hard behind the scenes, Ad Hoc Group 2, which is talking about speech-to-text services. So that's been very active for the last year, and we're going to see where the future will take us with that. And there are other standards. There's another one that's new that's coming out in 2023, hopefully, and that is on interpreting hubs. which is part of a new set of standards for the interpreter's working environment. And it also includes sound isolation booths, both mobile and permanent. But the new hub standard goes a little bit farther. So that one is also to reflect some new working conditions. So we're going to get into the meat of this conference and start hearing from our panelists. The first question I'd like to ask is, to what extent are standards important to your company? So we're going to start with Richard because he's right in front of me at the top of my screen. So be very brief and just tell us if these are important to you.
Yes, standards are very important. And, you know, to make the point, everything I've got here connected together is using standards for the way that they're all fitting with each other. And so standards are vital, including in RSI, which is our business. But I'd also say that it's an early days for our standards. So they are vital, but it does take a long time to get them to be as good as they should be.
Thanks, Richard. Sergio, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, the question of whether standards are important to the industry, I think is undoubtedly yes. How important they are to me and the company, that for that, I would say it really depends on the standard. It really depends on how relevant we find them, how useful they are, and I guess we're going to talk about how well they keep pace.
And can I just ask, tell us which standards are important to your company?
I mean, specifically 24019 is the one I have my sharpest eye on.
Okay.
That's the one that's most relevant to what we at Boost Events do.
Okay, and I'm going to dig a little deeper. What about 23155, the conference interpreting standard? How important is that one to your company?
To our company, it's not one that we keep our eye on, right? When we focus on the it's not to say it isn't important to the industry, and it's not important to us as a player in the industry. In terms of how it informs our tech development, though, that then it becomes secondary. And since we focus on being a tech player, that's not one that's that informative to what we do daily.
Okay, great answer. Thank you. Let's hear from Orosh. Which standards are important to Interactio?
Sure. Actually, all of them. When I say all of them, all of the ones relevant to our industry, right? Obviously, 24019 is the one that is on everyone's mind. At the same time, 24019 is the most difficult one to live with for our industry for two reasons. Number one, it's been a very contentious standard, even in the making, right? Number two, it's not a certification standard, so there's nobody out there who can give you a paper saying you're 24019 compliant. It's up to you as a provider to make sure that you have everything in place and to make a claim that actually is credible. So that's one of the difficult parts of 24019. Plus, the whole discussion around audio and related video quality and lip sync, et cetera, but mainly audio quality. That discussion has turned into a very, shall I say, at times ideological one, and it's become very kind of reminds me of party politics in certain countries. And from that point of view, it's become very difficult ground for anyone trying to make a claim, because the moment you make a claim, somebody's gonna, come right back at you and say, yeah, but you should have measured this way or that way, right? Because even the measurement methods, I don't know if we're going to go into that in great detail or not, but anyway, even those are only recommended methods, right? So it's a very difficult standard, albeit the most important one. But yes, we do absolutely keep an eye on it. I dare to say that our audio quality is on par with 24019. We're doing testing according to the recommended methodologies all the time, really. We've had some independent ones done. We do them in-house. Then you mentioned 23155. That's also an important standard. I understand what Sergio is saying, and it makes a lot of sense. But being a tech player, it's something they keep an eye on, but not necessarily something that informs their decisions. And I think that actually makes a lot of sense, because it's more of a management standard, how you run your interpretation provision, right? We have that standard. We've been certified. I know that a few other players present here today have as well. I think it's going to be important for anyone dealing with the provision of interpreters, right? Not the provision of interpretation as a software service or as a software that enables the provision of interpretation. So generally, standards, yes, especially in our field also, cybersecurity standards are very important. We have that as well, 27001, and I think quite a large number of others present here today do as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Orosh. Claudio, how about speaking on behalf of Kudo in this sense?
Yes, I cannot but more or less repeat what the others say. The standards are important. Of course, there is no doubt about it. Probably standards are important for different reasons for different stakeholders. And this is something that maybe we can touch base at a later point. Of course, we have taken part even in the writings of standards, in particular, the standard of our interpreting delivery platform. And I would say one of the most important role of standards, in my opinion, is on the one side to set expectations, which are real, but also to motivate the players to higher standards, to inform them which are the standards that are considered high by the industry. So it's an important role, of course, so there is no doubt about this.
I have a question specifically for you, Claudio. Since Kudo has the interpreter marketplace, is the conference interpreting standard 23155 important to you, or do you also follow other interpreting standards such as the community interpreting standard?
I would say it's, to be honest, a mix of both. Again,
Okay.
The most important role, in my opinion, that standards have, we are not talking about the standards about security, cybersecurity, as Urash before mentioned, which are very strict in also giving visibility to the third parties about what you're doing behind the scene, which is very important. About interpretation, we are, of course, following these standards, get informed by these standards, and we integrate them with what I would say good practices or informal, if you want, standards, and find a good solution, a good mix that works in real life.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to move on to Alvaro from Acadu. Alvaro, you have both an RSI platform and AI services. So tell us to what extent any of these standards are important to your company.
Well, in our case, as an RSI platform, we are not a service provider. So we partner with service providers. So the standards are also very important because the agencies require that from us. This is number one. Number two, so we have standards. I don't think we follow like the 2419 or specifically those standards. We more just try, for example, the audio bit rate that the interpreters receive has the one considered as a good quality in the market. Also the video and image resolution, if it can be HD, like 1080 pixels as well, we try to maintain it. Also the number of droplets that we get from our stream to be less than a 5%. Also the latency. So all these things, we are trying always to be at the top, but we haven't compared them with maybe the standards of the market. But I guess we shouldn't be very different because this have been always improving. We started with maybe 192 kilobits per second, for example, audio bitrate, which is a low quality for audio. Then we improved it to 256 when our video quality also increased to 1080 pixels. So yeah, so we have from the tech side tried to improve to make it always bring the best that we can from tech perspective to the interpreters. But maybe we have to compare with the 2419 that I just heard that other companies are providing. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So you don't necessarily follow a specific international standard, but you're trying to set a high standard, period, which is great.
Yeah, because
Okay,
because of the complaints, no? You always need to make sure that you have the platform as best as you can,
Yeah.
then to see if it's a platform issue or it now becomes a device issue from some
Yeah.
stakeholder using the platform. So we have to try to keep the best that we can. Yeah.
Okay, now I'd like to hear from our AI world. So Lakshman, to what extent are standards important to your company?
Well, standards are all important for every company, right? So there's no doubt about it. The relevance of the standards are more important. Um, so we are in a different world that where we are purely AI-based solution, where we provide AI-based interpretation. We provide text, we provide audio-based interpretation as well. The question is, how does this, we have moved into a digital world, and from an analog world. So we've moved to a digital world. We just need to understand how the existing standards roll over, or how are they relevant into this new digital, for this digital solution, and make necessary changes to adjust or come up with new standards that address these technological advancements that are happening. I think that is key. And my personal belief is to that we work as an industry, but we also work with customers who actually use a solution that say that this what standards would help them with the interpretation needs. And I think it's a collective way to develop some new standards, and we definitely need them.
Has your company looked at standards that are in a different standards family? Because the standards that I mentioned at the beginning of this were for interpreting, translation, and related technology, but there are other sets of standards for audiovisual communication technologies, including captioning, subtitles, and that kind of thing, but they tend not to focus on live events. So has your company looked at any of those standards families, I guess?
Yeah, so there are different standards for, you can say, hey, there's a standard for translation of content, which is like the Blue Score, and there's standards for speech to text, which is word error rate, and there are those standards that are available for general translation. Now, what we're looking with interpretation is an end-to-end system that includes, it's like a digital photography, right? Going from analog photography to digital photography. There's sunlight, there's the shutter speed, all of that is in one side on the analog space. But then on the digital side, it's the PPI and, what's the signal to noise ratio, what do you do in there? So from an end-to-end solution, you have to look at the speech quality to the end delivery when you use machine interpretation. And those standards still are not relevant. They're halfway there, but those standards don't provide a complete end-to-end standards that is relevant to the current solution that we provide.
Could you see room in this world of translation, interpreting, and related technologies for a standard that encompasses your services?
I'm sure I do. For sure, we all need standards, and we need to come up with standards. So there's some level of acceptance from a customer, and perhaps it also sets certain criteria for what the speech delivery is, and the capturing of speech, as well as doing the complete end-to-end interpretation. Now, how do we come up with these standards? What is relevant? What actually works? And what is enforceable as well? I think that's somebody mentioned here in the panel that you can have standards, but if you have to self-certify, it's okay. But how do we need standards that can you can go through some audits and prove yourself and then have that relevant. And how do we come up with that whole mechanism to deliver this? And does that create a new industry, a new bureaucracy, that another hurdle out there? We need to avoid those kind of situations and make it really simple and easy so that it's good for the industry.
We'll talk about those hurdles in a minute, but I liked what you said about the end-to-end, and specifically with standard 24019, the simultaneous interpreting delivery platform standard. The end-to-end concept was our greatest challenge in developing this standard, and that led to the way the standard was created to involve different stakeholders who had different areas of responsibility. Yet it made it a more useful standard, but it made it more difficult to create a standard that can be certified, that can allow for certification. So the end-to-end is a key point. Next, I'd like to hear from Tim. Tim, to what extent are standards important to your company? You're doing some pretty interesting things at your company.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it is important and also not important. I'll tell you why. So to give some background, the Accelerate is offering AI-based machine translation for media content and political content translation. We also offer some speech recognition synthesis, and then combined all together, we offer real-time interpretation service. Recently, we launched Zoom-based interpretation applications where people speak in different languages, then they can understand each other in their own language they can speak. That said, to what extent are Accelerate following interpretation standards? As I said, no, some are very important and some are not really important, because if you think about it, these standards are created to protect the relevant parties. So for the standards that protect users, definitely it's kind of very important things, because it's very important to maintain the quality of the interpretation, because otherwise, if you think about it, if you are engaged in medical translation or legal translation or business deals, if the quality of translation is super low, then it will face some consequences, legal consequences preferably. And when it comes to standards that protect the providers, interpreters, we are not really using any human interpreters, but it's AI. So do we really need to protect the technology or AIs? That's another story, right? So we probably don't need to protect the AI as much as we want to protect the human interpreters. Another function that standards offers to people is to be compatible, right? So for future use cases, if we follow certain standard, it's easier for our future users who can who has been using our human translators and also adapt this kind of new technology or something similar because it's more compatible that way. But we also need to think about new things, because we're creating something that didn't exist in the past, right? AI is creating something new. It's a technology, so probably we need to stick into something different, very different, like system security. This is very important. We need to stick to data security. That is not really something that the standard we are talking about here in this group. AI ethics, that is a different standard we should be talking about as well. There's something completely new as well, like not just quality, user experience, how accessible the system is. What is the latency of the interpretation, for instance? And also because AI is adding so much value into this interpretation world. For instance, like AI can now summarize the entire meeting. It can provide the meeting logs. It can also suggest what kind of action item that left in the meeting. So for instance, if people started relying on one of these functions, for instance, we probably need to come up with some new standard in there as well.
Thank you very much, Tim. And Orosh, I see your hand raised, so.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Actually, it just reminded me of something, right? That you mentioned how important are standards to the industry. Obviously, very important, because standards are developed by the industry. ISO standards are developed by stakeholders in the industry. They're not legislation. They don't come out. They're not developed by a third party. It's us who come together and we agree this is going to be the standard, right? And one thing that's, I think, really important for everyone to realize, and we do, is that the point of standard is precisely for them to become second nature at some point, right? The obvious one we never mentioned, ISO 639, language codes. We all adhere to them, right? And you don't need any certification or whatever, because it's agreed. All of us use those 2 or 3 letter ISO codes for languages, and that's what standards are for all of us to agree on a certain common denominator. And I find very fascinating what Tim was just saying about, you know, all of the AI powered stuff, and it's actually the use cases that are going to dictate future standards. That's, I think, also something that very, very important to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
If I can, can I say something?
Go ahead, Alvaro.
I also, one thing that we experience at Agado, that usually are the clients who come up with these standards, like for the AI side, like for example, that becomes the norm to specify the transcript of the meetings, where are they stored, in which region of the world. That is something that it didn't happen before, now it's happening to us now. Also, some universities in the States, they are requesting that when we show subtitles, AI subtitles on the lectures, there should be an option to change the color for people that have some accessibility problems for the view. That is also something that is the client telling us. Then we realize that it's not only them, more start to come up with these requirements. So I think sometimes it's the market itself who come up with these standards.
Okay, excellent. And that is a perfect segue, because next I want to hear from Aki, who is our client market representative from Dell. Aki, how important are standards to your company as a client on the client end?
Yeah, thank you. You know, at Dell, we are not very active from the events and interpretation perspective in the ISO standards. So I would say, you know, the technical standards are somewhat important to us. You know, I say somewhat because of that, you know, lack of expert knowledge, perhaps, or full understanding of ISO yet, right? So we are inclined to rely on partners or service providers that we work with to have some level of, you know, standards in their process, right? But at the same time, some standards are more important to us than the others. You know, for instance, data security of technology or platform that we use, right? Or the idea of qualifications and competency of conference interpreters, you know, for instance, are really, you know, still very relevant to me or us. And, you know, I think when we talk about standards, I often think more from the perspective of the quality of the output rather than the process or the environment in which, you know, how the things are produced. And, you know, I forget the importance of the client role in all this as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, some interesting insights and comments. What Aki said about that clients don't always know the specific standards. They're relying on language service providers or other companies to have those standards. But I think we can all agree that the market does care about standards because they want to have a good user experience. And it's up to the companies to follow the standards to make that happen. The end users aren't necessarily going to know about the specific standards. But it's great, Aki, that you look to your service providers to adhere to those standards and help educate you about why they're important. Okay, the next question I'd like to ask is a little bit more specifically. We touched on this, some of you touched on this. Do you feel the need for a new standard or a revised standard? We heard a couple things, some issues with 24019, the SIDP's platform standards, that it's problematic because you can't get certified. It's a self-certifying standard. Are there standards that you would like to see, new ones? And can you be a little bit specific? Or do you want to see some existing standards revised? So First, I'd like to ask Richard.
I'm going first each time. Okay.
It's because
Well,
we haven't heard you in a little bit, and I decided it was time
That's-
to hear your
that's true.
voice.
That's true enough. If we take 24019, so I was involved in that standard, but I came kind of quite a long way through. So I got the tail end of the creation of that standard. And I'd say that where we are with that standard is, dare I say, pretty standard. That the first time you do these things, it's really hard. So I'd say we're a long way from a great standard there, but that's not to criticize everyone who's involved. And I was involved, right? It's not to criticize everyone. It's hard. And it's a learning process. And the sort of thing you want to standardize is things like outcomes. And you don't want to be saying how things should be done. You don't want to say what technology should be used and these kind of things, you know. So yeah, there's a lot that you could say, you know, is not perfect in that standard, and the other ones that I've seen, albeit less, you know, with a less critical eye in the industry. But it's because we're learning how to do it, and the what we need to do is gradually learn together what the outcomes are that we need to standardize on, and learn how to express those things. You know, what one really difficult challenge for everybody in the stand is you know, you may have a feeling for what you want to achieve, but how do you turn that into words and then get those words onto paper? So yeah, you know, a long way from being perfect, but I don't think that's any reason to, you know, to knock the idea of having the standard or the fact that we've started on that journey. You know, it's great to have taken a first step, but yes, certainly that needs more work, more attention, more effort.
Sergio, how is 24019 working for you? Do you feel that it's keeping pace right now? I mean, the standard was just published, but do you feel that it's relevant and a pretty good standard? Do you feel that it could be improved? Do we need to do a revision sooner?
Well, I mean, the answer to all those questions is yes. And I think building on what Richard said, when a standard is far from perfect, but there's no reason to keep pursuing it, I think goes to a lot of those. You know, I echo what Richard was saying. It goes to a lot of those questions, Naomi. You know, it's a lot like of course, the standards cannot keep up with technology because we will continue innovating and the pace will continue to go. And we know how laborious putting together these standards will be. However, if we view these standards as a baseline, as a standard, like this is the foundation on which you can build upon, then that's fine. And as Uro said before, and as other panelists have said, you know, time also informs where the standards need to go. Use cases inform, customers and their usage inform where these standards need to go. So it is, I think, it's a necessary part of the process to know that standards will lag behind technology, because it's the technology and the usage of that technology that's going to inform where the standards need to go next. If a standard was presupposing how we innovate, I mean, that it just wouldn't work in that way. So yeah, I think what Richard says is correct, and I think that's I think it's well said, and I think that's also a necessary and appropriate part of what we do and why we do it.
Thank you very much. Claudio, we've heard a couple of interesting perspectives. I want to zero in on one thought. Sergio said that the standards, I'm losing my train of thought here just a second because it's complicated. So just give me a second. Sergio
Standards
said, yeah,
cannot keep pace with technology, and it's
exactly.
some way
Thank you.
even. Yeah.
Yes, and a well-devised standard. Our whole entire topic here tonight is, are standards keeping pace with technology? But I lost my train of thought there for a second because I had a little bit of a brainstorm. A well-written standard, it isn't relevant if it's relevant that it's keeping pace with technology. It will allow innovation and new technology to come into play. If it's a well-written standard, it's describing the what and not the how. And a well-written standard should not cause a problem with keeping pace with technology. On that note, do you think that 24019 for Kudo is serving Kudo well?
Yes, absolutely. Standards, if you want to put it like this, are the minimum that you can offer, whatever whatever the standard is, to either satisfy the users, all the stakeholders. Okay. That said, going over the standards, so improving more than the standards, which is technology based, a standard will not prevent higher quality made by technology or made possible by technology. So standards are, in my opinion, absolutely not something that make technology innovation impossible. They just push the minimum standards. However, it has to be said that also lack of standards, of course, do not impede the technology. For example, we have heard it from several people. We launched some months ago our Kudo AI, so speech-to-speech translation system, which is based on zero standards because there are zero standards. And this doesn't either both prevent us to innovate, the lack of standards, but it doesn't also allow us to innovate in a random way because there is also the market or the user regulated in some way the expectation to technology. So what I'm trying to say is that standard or lack of standard do not impede technology. However, having standards as a guideline is a good practice to have. And this is at the moment, for example, missing in all the AI sphere of our area, where I don't feel a lack of standards, so I don't feel that we are missing standards, but we are missing guidelines. And guidelines, for example, in our case, come now from academia, where there is a lot of research going on. So they work something like a substitution of standards, where we know, for example, how transcription has to present it, the speed, the colors, and many things, or the voice of the speech translation, and so on. And there, having standards, if we would have standards, they would not impede technological development, but they would guide it. And I think it would be a nice thing to have.
Orosh, we'll hear from you, and then we're going to move on to some others. But how do you feel about the existing standards? Are they working well for Interactio? Do you feel that they need to be revised? Do you see new standards that need to be formed?
They are working well. They're working well because they offer guidance and direction, right? Those that are of the sort, those that just require you to do something, and they're binary standards in a way where you have to have this, period. Otherwise, you don't meet the standard, right? Those are clear, and there's no discussion about them. But yeah, they are helpful because they help guide the direction in which we want to develop. But the thing with standards, taking one step back to the question you were raising, are they keeping track, right? Or are they keeping pace with development? I suppose by definition, no, right? Because you base standards on what exists. You don't base standards on what may come. So technological development, by definition, is going to go beyond, right? There was no standard when the Wright brothers decided they want to fly, right? And then many people killed themselves trying to. and so on. And there was no standard for remote interpreting until remote interpreting became reality. Although, funnily enough, already back in 1983, there were elements of different standards that were put together to say, well, if you're putting up a remote interpretation setup, right, with a screen and the camera there and blah, 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 all of that, the old school remote interpreting, make sure that your video input meets this standard, make sure that your audio output and input meets those standards, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all there. And one thing is our new technologies integrating existing solutions, and that's what we're all about. And we're talking about minimum levels. Audio quality, it's easy. You have an audio quality standard. That's what has to be met. But then again, when I say easy, is it, right? Because if I do this, my audio is no longer ISO compliant. I do this, it is again. And that's the trouble with standards. And, what kind of standard everybody would wish for in our industry right now? A standardized remote speaker, right? Well, it ain't going to happen because everybody's used to picking up their phone, switching on, FaceTime or whatever other tool and talking to their grandkids. And that's how they want to participate in conferences too. And that's not how it works. But if they waltz into a conference room, then immediately attitudes change. And they know you have to sit down, you have to switch your mic on, speak into the microphone, tone down your crazy accent if you have one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? But so it learning process. I think what Richard said, this, we're just out of the starting blocks and it's going to take a while, I think.
Aki, I'd like to turn to you. As a customer, do you feel there's an area where standards are lacking? What are your biggest challenges? Are there any areas that an international standard, a new standard could help you with?
Yeah, and I think some of you mentioned about the market and use cases inform where we need to go, right? And then we are going more towards AI solutions for an event, whether it be speech to speech or text to speech or speech to text or whatever else there may be. And I think this is where maybe some of the expectations or standards, responsible application of AI, solution would be helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. Time to talk with some of our AI focused folks. Lakshman, you touched on this previously, but let's talk about standards inhibiting innovation. In a perfect world, in my view, standards would drive innovation. So let's get down to some details here. You talked a little bit about this, and I want Tim to chime in and Alvaro as well. What kind of standard do you think we should create for this new world that the three of you and also Kudo and also Interprify are working in, and VoiceBoxer as well? What kind of new standard can we create? What does it look like? What's its goal?
You gave me the toughest question here. I think
Yes.
It'd be hard to read into the future, but I want to reflect what Uros and Sergio said. Right, standards. Standards always lag behind technology and development, but at the same time, the standards set a foundation for the development of new technologies or new innovations.
Exactly.
So, and one of the things that Uros mentioned is we all follow these language codes. I think that that's just a baseline, right? But there's so many other things that we can adopt from these baseline standards. And for me, this is educational as well, because some of these standards are fairly new, not 4 or 5 years back when we started this innovation and got this had this product into the market. But now, we need to see how these standards, what the baseline is, what baseline requirements we can meet. And I think we need to keep up-leveling the baseline to adjust to new technologies. Um, uh,
Mhm.
I don't have specifics on these, on what these need to be, but as we get more customer feedback, more requirements, um, I think we can add to these standards and we can contribute to these standards that need to be developed. But the bigger ones, I would say, are the ones that would come from customers and their requirements on this is what is acceptable to us. I think folk like Aki and many of our customers, their customers like Aki and companies can contribute to here are the base requirements that we need from
Yeah.
this evolving technologies, and we can then implement those. I think that's we can provide our customer feedback as well, what feedback we get from our customers into these standards. I think that's a good way to like provide set these standards.
Yeah, Alvaro mentioned a specific issue with visibility, accessibility, and I thought that was really
Yeah,
interesting.
that's a cart-based solution. I think
Yes,
that's a well-known standard. Yeah.
yes, but it's not a big part of the conversation in our world with speech to text services.
Yeah.
Certainly. So Tim, Aki, Alvaro, let's talk about how a new standard, what that might look like. It should, in my opinion, be a way of bringing companies and different stakeholders together, including clients. There is a complete lack of client and marketplace representation in the standards organizations, in my opinion. And it would be great to have more input from you on that. But what would a new standard look like? And Vivi's telling me that we have to wrap up and go to Q&A. But Tim, you had some interesting things to say a little bit ago. What would a goal of a new standard be? To help describe what these services are and create a minimum baseline of what we are talking about, not how we're doing it, but what we're talking about?
Well, new standards should be based on the features, and then when it comes to these kind of new features, our clients are very smart. They know what is possible and what is kind of like feasible these days. So they have a actual request. These has to be added to the features.
Yeah.
So all the standard has to be kind of created, involving all the different parties, the providers or clients as well. And well, when it comes to kind of making standard, there are two types of industries. One are where the tech and business are created and then come up with a standard because there were some problems they have to address, or because standard that will help driving them kind of going further. Or sometimes there is something like people gather together before something actually was created. They come up with a standard, and then all the industry kind of follow the standard. But usually it's kind of the former case, where usually standards that kind of come later because they want to catch up, and then there are problems that kind of like identified. So I think in this case, because we are creating, adding so much new features, standard will follow eventually. So the actual use cases will be something like that. So let's see. So one of the standard, we are talking about when it comes to the typical traditional human interpretation, right? There is some standard for confidentiality, because interpreters has to know something, learn something in beforehand, and then kind of like involved in the meeting, and then they are not supposed to talk about it outside of meeting, for instance. It's not important anymore in the AI world, because AI itself won't be actually expose any kind of a confidentiality out of the meeting, but it will be converted into a security question. If will we be able to connect, confidentially secure all this kind of like data inside the system, and how we'll be able to make it accessible for actually privileged users, right? For instance, like we are creating meeting note and then sending it out, but what kind of users, which users should be able to access that, or versus what kind of users should not, right? So these are kind of the new features we have to think about when it comes to standard. And then, of course, this discussion should involve the clients and the providers as well.
Thank you very much. Okay, we need to go into Q&A, but I just want to conclude briefly with the reality that standards do something fabulous. They bring all of us together, competitors, users, all different stakeholders, and they provide a way for us to communicate using the same terminology and basic understanding of what we are talking about. So as we think about developing a new standard or new set of standards for all of these new technologies, let's keep that in mind. I believe the objective of a standard should be to make it clear what we are talking about and allow us to have a forum to work together and to actually foster innovation and move technology forward, not stifle it, not have a reactionary standard, but I'd actually like to focus on creating standards that help innovation. And I had coffee with Marguerite Laley today, who was the convener of Working Group 3. She's about to retire from that. But she told me this story about when she was at a meeting in Tokyo, I believe, and all of the hardware producers were together coming up with ideas and talking to each other because they were suddenly speaking the same language together. And that is the beauty of standards. Q&A time. Vivi?
Thank you, everyone. Let me get my camera back on. This is amazing. Such a great panel, so many great ideas, and good to see everyone coming together for the betterment of our industry. I see Urosh has already replied here, but I want to open it up to everybody else in case you didn't get the chance to see the Q&A. What would be different in today's world if there were no standards in our industry? Urosh, I see your hand up, but I think that's from previous, but feel free to expand.
It actually is from earlier, because what I wanted just to add in the AI discussion, because I think this intersection, right, between AI and human interpreting is going to be massively interesting in terms of standards. Why? Because if I'm interpreting as a human and then interpreting another human, that human is giving me non-standardized input, and I'm delivering, let's be honest, non-standardized input as well. Because if you transcribe what I'm saying and try to put that in standard English, you're going to have a lot of questions. Where is the question mark? Where is an exclamation mark? How do you spell that name, et cetera, et cetera. And this is where it's going to get super interesting for AI, and it's going to be so massively fascinating, I think, is how do you standardize the output of speech to text, right? Or do you allow AI in a speech-to-speech scenario to make the human mistakes that we make in communication, the ums and uhs and and repetitions and all of that? So this is going to be hugely interesting. As for the question that you asked, Vivi, I answered it in writing, so I'll be quiet now to give room to others. I just wanted to add that because I think, coming back to what Naomi was saying, how we need to work together, that's going to be a massively interesting area to explore further.
I'll take a stab at answering the question. I really believe that if we operated in a world without any standards, we wouldn't have as interesting competition and innovation, frankly. I think that competition and innovation are more interesting and possibly more advanced than if we did not have standards, because it does bring people together to strive to do better, to strive to improve, but also to work with and against each other. So that's my answer.
Yeah.
I think it's a better world.
Yeah, can I chime in on this? So standards are really important. If there were no standards, it'd be really hard to convey, like, especially as we move forward in technology. And I'm speaking purely from an AI-based perspective, right? From a new advancement, existing customers who would not translate to use our solutions unless we say, hey, there are some minimal standards that you've been using in the past, and we meet those requirements, right? And they can see the evolvement from existing solutions to newer solutions, and it helps that continuity, and that is relevant and that is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good.
Great.
This was the second part, so we'll add one more because I don't see any new questions. Does anyone have a favorite standard that they're working on or excited to see that is currently being worked on?
Can I come in on the last question? I had my hand raised. It just because specifically, I believe that the questioner said standards in our industry, and I think there's an important point to make that the standards in our industry, certainly for the RSI industry, which is where I'm from, that they've really made no difference. The reason that they've made no difference is because we've been using all the standards from other industries to get us to where we are today, right? I think this is fairly obvious to everyone. We rely on the whole of the rest of the world and all the other standards that help us build us. So the standards that we have in our industry are really for the future. Then they're not what has got us here. They're what takes us forwards, and the same will be true. And I think this is just echoing what everyone's saying. If you take what we're all doing in AI, with our AI implementations of speech to text and then speech to speech, that I think lots of us here are already doing. Those are going to create new standards going forwards. But now's not the time for the standard. You have to feel your way through to get to the beginning of the journey, if you like.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Anybody else? Does anyone to answer the question? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to monopolize the discussion, but the interesting thing you mentioned, Naomi, is how standards can foster competition and development. And I think that's very, very true if the standard is a minimum level type standard, right? It's like Formula One decides, okay, from now on, 4 cylinders, turbo engine, that's where we're going. Let's see what you can do, right? That's one way of standardizing things, right? And the other one is just our safety standards, again, in terms of audio quality, etc. A lot of it is health and safety related, right? And again, we're in competition in a way. It's fostering competition. Who's going to be the first to meet the requirements? Who's going to be the first to be able to present them in a way that's bulletproof, and nobody's going to be able to try and what's the English word? Basically, break down your compliance matrix and so on. So I think that's definitely so. While on the other hand, as Richard said, if you standardize certain things now, then forget innovation because you're going to block it. So find balance, right?
Yes, we absolutely do not want to block innovation, and any good standard will not do that, in my opinion. So favorite standards, that was a question. I'm going to say that 24019, the Simultaneous Interpreting Delivery Platform Standard, is my personal favorite of the moment. Even though it's far from perfect, we brought in the concept of end-to-end, I don't want to use the word compliance, but end-to-end responsibility spheres. And that was something rather new with the standard. And with that, we try to provide an area to hold speakers accountable for their audio and their video. And I'd love to get that standard out there and better known with the speakers, but we need the manufacturers to catch up with us because there really aren't enough easy to use microphones out there for presenters. You're wearing a headset. I am not wearing a headset. That's because I have my new toy right here. Some presenters and speakers don't like to wear headsets, but there aren't enough good products out there that meet the standards. So we're really relying on the manufacturing world to start being innovative. But that's my favorite standard 24019 because it reflects these different areas of responsibility among the stakeholders, and it's unique and special. So I think we all did a great job on that.
Can I come in, Naomi, on the so if I answer a question that really no one's asked in terms of where standards need to go, I'd say something that hampers all of us and will continue to hamper everybody, and as we go into the world of AI, it's still going to be a problem, is that there are really no standards for things like audio on computers and telephones. You cannot get any indication of what quality the sound is for something like a laptop microphone. If you could, there might be good laptop microphones by now, right? But you can't. And there's not even standards for how the sound is handled, in terms of the internal routing and switching and the manipulation that can be done. And this is a real problem for us, because if there was a focus there, you can bet that someone would make a better version. For example, if you take any headset microphone or laptop microphone, you will never get a noise figure for that microphone or a sensitivity number, because no one thinks about those things in that way. And even if AI tomorrow were better than any human, which is obviously this is some years away, but if it just happened tomorrow, it would be a problem for the AI systems. It's not a problem that's going to go away.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to keep us on time here, or I know we have more comments, and everyone here has been super great providing a lot of feedback. I want to remind everyone that this webinar happened as a result of discussions during our monthly SIG meetings, and we saw so much more participation during the roundtable at the conference. We saw a full room at not just a roundtable, but all of the interpreting sessions on the track. So let's continue this conversation. Please join the SIG. If anyone else wants to dive deeper into a specific topic, we can do it either at the monthly SIG meetings, or we can have a part 2 webinar and keep this conversation going. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank
you, everyone, to our panel.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.